Hello, 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 and welcome to Keyboard. I am Tembi, and I am so excited to be speaking with W. Ellington Felton, aka Wes Felton, who is a singer, poet, actor, and MC. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's introspective, loquacious, giving, insightful, passionate, honest, transparent. He is an artist. W. Ellington Felton has long been described as a Renaissance man and a ranter of his own thoughts. But if you talk to him or see him perform, it may all make sense. He is a DC native and son of jazz pianist Hilton C. Felton Jr. and heavily influenced by his surroundings. Growing up in Washington, D.C., Wes was introduced to the fine arts early on. Equipped at the School Without Walls with a backpack of notebooks filled with poems and rhymes, he hit the pavement running quickly, making a name for himself on BET's Teen Summit. He went on to study acting at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. After returning from college, he went on to teach and act for Arena Stage's Living Stage Theater Company while pursuing his music career. In 2000, he formed the hip-hop soul group The Crossroads with R&B crooner Raheem DeVaughn. He has collaborated and shared the stage with artists like Chris Rock, Michelle Ndegeocello, Dion Ferris, Eric Roberson, Common, Dave Chappelle, and many more. Still a DC resident and single father, he has taught oratory workshops part-time for Ford's Theater's education department. With a featured role in the film Love.com on Prime and roles in the upcoming film The Empty Walls and All Black Network Season 2 of Hush, these are just reminders that passion, training, and hard work pays off. Welcome, W. Ellington Felton.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you today. Let's jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a singer, a poet, an actor, MC, many more things. Tell me about your first memory of the arts in your life, and what's the first art form that you experimented with as a young person?
Well, if we're going to really go to the beginning, I was going to a kindergarten slash daycare called Second New St. Paul and over in Northeast DC. And there was a teacher there who, suggested to some of the parents for the kids who were very introverted, they suggested that they try out dance as a way to kind of like getting them to break out of their shell. And so I started off as a tap dancer, and I learned how to tap dance as a child, and that's what helped me kind of basically overcome my any type of stage fright, but also at a very early age make me feel comfortable, being in front of people or talking in front of people. So that's the very first. The more focused was later on, like in elementary school. I was always the master of ceremony for the talent shows, or, if they ever needed to, someone to kind of get people together when the teachers failed at doing it. I was always often the designated organizer of the youth organizer. And then again, as I got older, I was very active in like protest. My mom found the old news clipping of when I was like really young. I think I might have been maybe barely in junior high or middle school, where I led a protest down at the South African embassy for against apartheid. So I was always kind of like, the world was always kind of my stage as a young kid. And then ultimately, there was a woman named Geraldine Gilstrap who was a substitute teacher at School Without Walls, my high school, who introduced me to a play called My Children, My Africa by Arthur Fugard. At that point, I guess that's when theater kind of became the more in the forefront of the various mediums of art that I do.
I love that you mentioned theater because you received a degree from the prestigious Carnegie Mellon University School of Drama. At this point, you already had, like what you talked about, your foundational artistic experiences like with your family and at your school during your time at school without walls and other aspects of your earlier artistic life. So how were you able to synthesize these things you talked about, the tap dancing, the bringing your personality to and to being the MC for events, all these things that you already took with you to Carnegie? How did you meld that with the experiences at Carnegie in your drama program?
Well, I have to be honest, Carnegie, my time there, my experience there was a very kind of like love-hate experience. At the time that I was there in the 90s, basically like the mid 90s. Started there in like 1994. And at that time, still CMU wasn't quite used to black men like me. Coming from a chocolate city like DC, which was still chocolate at that time. I was also rolling out of being on Teen Summit for 2.5 years, where I was basically on television for the world to see every Saturday morning. So, for those who may not know, Teen Summit was a BET show that was kind of like, I would say it was like the Black Mickey Mouse Club for a few generations, where they had a regular cast of members of young kids who were from all over the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, and sometimes other places, and all the celebrities and all the hottest black musicians at that time would come on and be guests. So that I learned at a very early age. I tell people all the time, by the time I got to Carnegie Mellon, I was a little burnt out. Not burnt out because of like drugs or, physically, but just psychologically learning about the wizard behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz, aka the entertainment industry. It was often for me at a very young age, I had a few very disheartening moments. So when I came to Carnegie Mellon and then had to kind of face, moments of implicit bias or times where I would feel like I was being discriminated against. And then and me being one who speaks out, who's a protester, there were a lot of times often where it would clash, and I would feel like my classmates couldn't relate because they wouldn't defend me, at these very, obvious times. And a lot of times they would be sparked because I would actually be defending another classmate. It wouldn't even be me defending myself. It would be pointing out, hey, that's kind of discriminatory. Like you can't say that to someone like and not expect it to affect them. But then also, it was a very competitive environment. So it created this environment too, where, kids didn't want to, it was very political, a lot of grown up activity that I had already experienced from being on Teen Summit. So I think what I gained the most outside of the training, now the training is definitely was crucial because it basically helped me kind of identify or put a name towards things that I could naturally do. So from a technical aspect, it was great like that. But I feel like the city of Pittsburgh itself, where I lived, they adopted me in such a way like to where, I started my music career while I was in school. I was auditioning for plays off campus and commercials and things, which they didn't want us to do while we were studying. But that was the only way I could kind of like really apply what I was learning to what I knew how to do. And what I had already known how to do was be a professional artist since I was a teenager. So, hopefully that kind of answers the question, but that's how I kind of got it. I tell people all the time sometimes where, sometimes my bio, it used to say, I did hard times at Carnegie Mellon University, theater conservatory. So almost made the same, like I got locked up, I got sent away. And often, like in some cases, when people get sent away to jails or places or programs that they're not necessarily, comfortable in, often it can be the spark or be the moment where they find God or they get a degree or they, they find some way to discipline themselves. And so it definitely helped me discipline myself while also Again, helping me build the brand of W.Ellington Felton, which was ultimately my always been my goal as a young man.
I appreciate that you talked about a holistic experience at Carnegie, and it wasn't just about what was happening in the classroom. It was about your developing a consciousness of yourself, as a Black man in this world. And you when you talk about the Teen Summit years, I remember that fondly. And I think about how much in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a lot of programming in the public space that was empowering to teens. I remember on the local TV level, Teen Summit and then Nickelodeon and stuff like that, where you saw young people, at least on the surface, right, appearing to
Hmm.
have a voice of their own. So
Yeah,
I can imagine that if you're coming from this empowered place and you're gone to school without walls, which you don't have to know anything about the school, you hear the name, that's telling you a lot about the way they educated young people, right?
correct. Yep.
Right. So you're coming from these kinds of, your musical family, learning how to tap dance, being an MC, and then you go into this more restrictive environment
Hmm.
that has the structure of craft,
Hmm.
but doesn't have the cultural competency, the competence, the foundation, the support, and just the awareness of race. Like almost, I guess, made for white people, I guess, is there's no plainer way to put it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was the only Black male in my freshman class.
I mean, that right there, like, what's that experience like?
It was intense, but School Without Walls, fortunately for me, by going to School Without Walls, that gave me a precursor, or at least kind of like some training ground on being in a mixed race population.
Okay.
Um, because at that time, School Without Walls was one of the few, if any, public schools outside of maybe Duke Ellington, where there was a heavy population of whites, Latinos, and that's for various reasons. A lot of times, a lot of what they call them, the base kids, whose parents were in, the military, a lot of them were getting bused to School Without Walls to attend because it just worked out that way. And that's what the particular school that base got assigned. And, those kids were from everywhere. They were all types of kids. And then you also had, ambassadors' children and government officials and people like that who wanted to send their kids to public school, but maybe somewhere where, they'll be able to be stimulated on a humanities curriculum level versus just trying to fulfill whatever yearly quotas that are required. You know what I mean? And so going to Carnegie Mellon, being in that environment, it wasn't culture shock for me, but what it was more of like, oh, this just the business. Like it's business as usual here, the same way it was at BET.
Okay.
Um, the moment that you kind of like, because don't get it twisted. Even when I was on Teen Summit, there were a couple of times where like during commercial breaks where producers had to come out there and yell at me because I may have said something on air that might have been, a conflict of interest. So let's say if the topic is, okay, how can we reduce, youth violence in the Black community or whatever, I might say, well, first thing we could do is we could stop running St. Ides commercials and malt liquor commercials in between this TV show because young people see it. You understand what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
So
And they're
it's
like,
tight.
no, no.
Right. So then to go to a Carnegie Mellon, and I'll give you a classic example, right? There was this one class I was in. I'll never forget it. And there was like, you're in theater, so you probably come across this exercise. It's one of the silliest exercises ever to me personally. It's called Earth My Body.
I don't know the name of it, but maybe when you describe it.
So basically what it is, okay, it's like something that's just like earth my body, water my blood, blah, 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 blah. So it's like
Oh.
something that's supposed to encompass your physical I think the class was called movement at that time,
Mm-hmm.
but it was something where it works on your physicality and your breathing and your voice at the same time. So it's
Okay.
like one of those courses, right?
Yep.
And they had this one teacher there, and everybody's going around, and it's basically, I guess, their attempt for you to, really draw from your gut, or really kind of
Yeah, be in
become
your
one with
body.
the earth, plant yourself and be planted, right,
Right.
as an actor. And then all of a sudden, the lady came around and she got to me, and she was like, "Come on, W, get into it, like a bushman, or like." And then she started giving these very obvious like
Oh,
examples that were
wow.
very like overtly racist, just
Wow.
blatantly like stereotypical towards me, that she didn't get it. And I was like, nah. I said, no, I'm not doing this. I said, I'm not from the bush. So I don't know what you want me to draw. She's like, oh, no, 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 no. I don't mean like, she's like, my ancestors, she like kept digging. She like doubled down on it. Or she's like, my ancestors, they come from a place where they talk like,
Oh
and
my gosh.
I'm like, yo, well, that's you, but you're missing the point. So I'm going to just sit down and excuse myself from this particular segment of the program. And then there were other times where I would see her, make little slight comments, because one of my classmates was Taifa Harris, which is a really cool and well known
I didn't really.
Black actor. Yeah, and so like there were times where Taifa was short. She's at that time, what they call natural hair. Had her hair as her hair.
Hmm.
Where there were times where that same teacher, I would hear her say something to try to, I guess she thought she would be encouraging somebody, and she'll say something, and I would just be like, whoa, 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 whoa. You can't. And so that particular environment, again, going to school without walls, where they allowed us to debate and allowed us to, I used to write poems and paste them next to the honor roll list, and it'd be a poem about fools teaching fools or
Uh,
something. And the principal would have an assembly about it, and everybody would know who wrote it,
I'm
but they
sure.
would do it, in a way where we say, listen, we just want to remind you that although we encourage the spirit of debate and protest here at School Without Walls, this is not behavior that exemplifies the School Without Walls way. This is not how you do it. So whoever put this poem up. So it was their way of even still kind of reprimanding me, but doing it in a way without trying to crush me or break me. And I will say, not just, and this is not just a CMU thing or a Carnegie Mellon thing. It's very much a corporation thing, and it's ultimately what the business is about of acting, where basically people want to take credit for you. They want to be able to say, oh, this person attended here, and it's because of this training is why they're excelling the way that they excel. Or this person works for this corporation. Well, they started with us, and it's because they started with us and they went on that they became this great, business person or entrepreneur. So at 17 and 18 and 19 years of age and 20 years of age and 21 years of age, that's a lot of that's some heavy shit to carry. And while also carrying the stress of not wanting to get cut, or making sure that you're presenting what these professors are expecting of you, while dealing with white supremacy, you know dealing with white entitlement, white privilege, all of these things that in 1994 and in 95 and 96 people definitely weren't comfortable with having dialogues, let alone even saying those words out loud in public. You know, so yeah, let's go on. That's why I say Carnegie Mellon is a bittersweet thing for me. But what I'll say is I learned there are a lot of classmates that I've connected with later on in life. A lot of them are very, still very active on television and off Broadway and all of that. And a lot of them actually have in many ways apologized to me for that experience, because when you have, with Black Lives Matter becoming a thing, it made a lot of people, believe it or not, really who you thought would get it. It didn't take it until then for them to kind of get it and identify and say, W, there might have been times where we should have advocated for you more, or There might have been times where we should have spoke up for you versus you always wanting to be the one to speak up because, all it did for me in that environment was create kind of like a shadow over me, so
Mm-hmm.
so it made it easy for during jury time for all of, when we would sit in front of the panel of all of our teachers and they're critiquing us, it gave them the opportunity to unify as if like, W's like, he's a
He's a
troublemaker
troublemaker.
or
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the cliche thing. But growing up as a black male, you kind of, unfortunately, I tell people all the time, the black male's superpower is self-restraint. That's our superpower. It's
Hmm.
the ability to constantly have these things that are in real time being thrown at you and, trying to get you to stop, but you got to figure out a way to, know when to restrain from like turning into the Incredible Hulk. You know what I'm saying? Or
Yeah.
like being in environments where you know that you're more qualified or you're more intelligent or you're more informed about whatever the job is, but still having to deal with people because they might be white, come in the room and just automatically think they're the expert. I deal with that all the time, like all the time.
Now,
And
even now.
yeah. But I've just learned, and I mean, and this could just come from some like random person on the street or, in a restaurant or anything like that. And that's what I mean, where even those little like microaggressive and, that the gaslighting that occurs, even just shopping sometimes, or buying soup. I had somebody the other day, I was ordering food to go ordering some soup, some pho noodles or something. And, the young lady says, "Do you have a table?" I was like, "Nah." I was like, "Is that part of it? Was that the process?" The place was set up where you order and then you go get at a table or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and I looked and I said, "Well, no." I said, but there was other seating. There's other seating in there. And she said, and I say, "Well, yeah, I'm going to eat it here." And she's like, "Well, it looks like there's no tables available right now." And I was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, and then she said, "And we don't want people walking around with food." And I said, "Well, first of all, this is where I got it. And this when this is when W had to come out and say, look, first of all, what kind of idiot would walk around with a hot bowl of soup?
Right.
First of all.
Right.
So just be mindful that moving forward, when you're talking to an adult, that you don't talk to them and don't you ever repeat that statement ever again. This is a TED talk for you right now. And I'm just telling you, don't ever do that because it's rude and it doesn't make sense." And I said, "Well, can I sit over there?" And then all of a sudden, some other guy who comes out the back, he's like, "Yes, yes, you can sit anywhere, sir." And some like,
Mm-hmm.
being even a bigger jerk to me. So
You just
you
wanted
deal with that
soup.
stuff.
You just wanted soup.
Yeah, that's it. And I just wanted to know, and I wanted to eat it there. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And you had to go through all
So
that.
yeah, and so it's like, unfortunately, even defending yourself as a black male, sometimes it can still be classified as a problem.
Aggressive.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And and I deal with that everywhere. I really deal with that in DC. I think that's one of the main reasons why I don't act as much as I should be in DC is because some people know that I'm a person that if there's some mistreatment going on or there's something improper going on, even if it's a technical thing, and I see it and I can say and I can even give a technical explanation of why this is incorrect, people will still label you as, "Oh, this guy, he's hard to work with," or this, that, you know what I mean? But you, again, like I said, that's something you learn to have to navigate just in general from being a little boy, or I guess ultimately to my death in this country.
And I hate it. I hate that all that extra labor has to take place in addition to the one thing that you're doing, getting the suit, playing the
Hmm.
role, analyzing the text, understanding the character. I mean, I'll say I will move on because you said you want to,
Yeah, yeah.
but I would like to acknowledge that there's another piece of that I know you understand, and that the theatrical canon in the United States already is has a bias to it, already has a central
Yep.
focus, right? And
Yeah.
and doesn't have a global perspective. when theater itself is global and historical, begins in Africa. So you already are at, as somebody else with a degree in theater, understanding how even what you're studying, that you're only learning part of the story, and whatever choices are made about what is taught at various institutions will impact how you go out into the world seeing your craft. So it is very complicated on top of
Yeah.
the things we have to deal with. So
Yeah, and this is ultimately like what ends up happening is when you're a person of color and you go into these certain environments, especially in an academia level, in many ways they're teaching you how to behave, not act. They're trying to teach you how to behave.
yeah.
And so, so for me, as a person whose family and parents I've never had my parents say, you better behave for that such and such. Now they might say, stop acting up here, or don't, come on, cut it out. But they never said to me, you better behave a certain way around such and such. Or they never say, hey man, make sure you careful how you behave around them white folk, because you don't want to get in trouble. That I didn't come from that environment which is very much a type of raising that a lot of Black people in America do come up under. They come up under, I tell people all the time, white supremacy would not exist if it wasn't for the people of color who perpetuate it, who still find value in it. So it's not, I've never been a person who looked at white privilege and all that stuff as a white thing. It's a American and unfortunately global thing that's perpetuated and encouraged and fed by the actual victims of it just as much as the perpetrators of it. Because if a person can only do to you what you let them do to you. Like at the end of the day, unless somebody's physically overwhelming and they have a strength advantage or something like that. But when we're talking about the psychological and the verbal methods that they use to perpetuate it, those things are the things that you can nip in the bud. Like you should be able to like nip in the bud. But because you got people that are like, oh, yes, sir, yes, sir, or whatever,
Yeah.
or because they feel like there's some identity that they'll acquire that will finally get them out of the Black person category and into like, I'm something special, or I'm, the magical Negro or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm not like them.
Fame.
I'm different.
Yeah. Or fame. And it's been in fame, unfortunately, that's the biggest veil and mask and perception that people, chase. And in some instances, and I'm gonna say this real quick, even sexuality and even, how the choices that people, who they choose to date and all of that. For some people, it is a very calculated and very strategic method to try to become invisible or blend in. You understand what I'm saying? Not invisible in the way of neglect, but invisible in the way of like, okay, they're no threat to this supremacy. So we're not going to worry about them. And we'll cast them, we'll keep them happy as long as they keep us happy. And that's just how it is,
So okay, we did a quick deep dive into white supremacist culture and how, many different people with different identities uphold that, right? And proximity to what's like designed as whiteness and how that privileges people. However, you can get close to that if you choose to do so. And I want to connect that to my next question, which is what themes and ideas do you find consistently coming up in your work? Because I know that what we just talked about comes up in your work, but I'm curious, like how you see, because you have a really significant body of work over a number of years, and you're very prolific. You just keep putting it out. You just have a lot to say.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, do you see certain themes that just like keep touching on?
I feel like what I do is I make blues music in the true tradition of what blues music really started out as. And that was the first form of protest music, the blues. Somebody took my dog and I'm pissed about it. Somebody took my wife and I'm sad about it. I just lost my job because there's a white guy who's less qualified, who just happened to be the grandson or the cousin of the manager.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the landlord just raised my rent. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I try to do is I try to be an example of kind of like the modern contemporary version of that kind of story, the blues. But I try to do it in a way that, like back then, I'm pretty sure some of those songs were relatable. I try to relate to people as on a human level, on a regular, hey, I got to pay a cell phone just like you. I got to keep a roof over my head just like you. I try to come from that perspective versus the grandiose or separatist approach of art, like a lot of times we as creatives get caught up in, again, fame, the perception and perception. You know what I'm saying? Because perception is really like 85% of the entertainment business. It's a lot of people faking it out there.
Yeah,
They
for real.
faking it. And so for
Well,
me, I
I'm
try to offer
sorry.
the
I'm
blues.
sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to, can I just, for a quick second, when you talk about people faking it,
Mhm.
do you think that a part of the faking also is like a circular relationship that we kind of agree to be in on it, that we deep down know that they're faking and we just are kind of playing the
Yeah, yeah.
role
Well,
also?
well, I kind of like I learned again when you kind of call it out because more people have bought into one of my favorite lines that I have in one of my songs is, imitators imitating imitators.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like people aren't even really ultimately being their true selves because there is some social construct that they have decided, or that their parents or their religion or whatever it is that they hold as their grand teacher introduced to them. They accepted it, and then that's kind of the that's just how it folds. So they automatically conform or assimilate to whatever environments that they think is going to advance them in their career. And
Mm-hmm.
so absolutely we do contribute to it by like not saying nothing, but also we contribute to it by supporting and continuing to support forms of creativity and art that are more detrimental to our community than actually beneficial to our community. And
Mm-hmm.
because it's safe.
Mm.
It's like, hey man, I gotta feed my family. That ain't my problem. And that's a human thing. Everybody, you can't say that's a black or white thing because we see all communities do it by, being insensitive and not practicing empathy when it comes to like something that's like, out of sight, out of mind, or this don't, hey, ain't none of my kids gay, so I ain't worried about none of that gay shit. Or, I'm a Christian and the Lord told me that this is why this has to be. I say to people all the time, I think that the human experiment is done. I don't think there's no more potential for us. I think we've shown that we're going to continue to know better, but the mass majority of us are going to choose the worst. We're going to make the worst decisions over the better decisions
When I heard you say that,
for money, power, and respect.
no,
And I hate to sound,
no, I wanted to be like, no,
I'm a
W,
misanthrope,
no, but
right? I'm
ah,
a misanthrope, so I see it. We witness it in real time. We witness it in real time. So again, let's
yes, you were saying you were a
let's
blues
find a
singer.
happier topic.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
said
So
you're a
now you
blues singer,
hear. So now you
not a
hear what I'm
blues singer,
saying.
a
I'm
blues
singing the
artist,
blues.
blues artist.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so you
yeah,
hear even as I'm explaining this,
yes.
that's the lens that I see. I chose that to try to elevate stories that, may not even necessarily be my personal story. It might be a friend of mine who's in a relationship and he can't communicate to his girl the way that I could.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'll do is I'll download whatever drama they got going on. I'll download that internally. I'll sit with it for a little bit, and then I'll come up with some way to literally craft a song or a poem about that. And in many ways, I've had people come up to me all the time and be like, "Hey, man, you helped me get through this." or somebody be like, yo, my girl broke up with me because of you, or you broke my relationship up because of one of your songs. And I'd be like, okay, job done. Because
That needed to
that's kind of
happen.
my approach. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes you gotta, and again, music for a lot of people is very much therapy. You know what I mean? It's an opportunity for people who might have a more traditional, like 9 to 5 routine. When they cut on a certain artist or certain song, they're able to kind of, they use it for escapism, and they'll live vicariously through them the same way people do with, actors on stage or TV and things like that. And so I just choose to talk about the ugly things. Instead of trying to sing the panties off, I'm trying to figure out, like, can I trust the panties? You understand what I mean? Or
Do you have
you know
like
what I
a
mean?
system of check marks, a checklist?
Nah, just more of like, what do I want to deal with what comes after
Hmm.
you get the panties? You know what I'm saying? And I used to be one of those, like, very my friends used to always tell me I was addicted to relationships. Like, I was the weird singer and rapper who, wanted to settle down and always kind of be bunned up. And as time went on, I realized that maybe that's not the best thing for me as a human. It might have been okay for me as an artist because I constantly have this muse, this in-house muse that I can use to create about, especially if there's ever any beef between us. And people love when I write. I have one friend who's a writer named Stephen Crockett, and he's always saying, yo, man, we just be praying for you to have a relationship because we know when it explodes, boy, you're gonna put out a
With some good
fire ass
music.
record. And I'm right. And I'm like, thanks, at the expense of me.
Right.
So I will say, as years have gone on, out of, my own, I guess, maturity, or just tired of that kind of chapter of creativity, I've learned how to just kind of, like, spare myself as well as, women from becoming just material for me. You know what I'm saying? I've learned that, like, it's okay to, like, again, to be in your own lane and own space, especially when you're a person, like, with a personality type like me. Like, I don't know, I've never been diagnosed with anything, but I'm pretty sure I got, as a creative, I probably have a little element of spectrum going on. There's some elements of, definitely obsessive compulsive disorder. Like, so you have to be man enough and mature enough to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to put that on people no more, until I figured out a really masterful way of controlling those characteristics when dealing with other people. And I think that rather than being told to do it, for individuals like myself, we have to do the work on ourselves. Because a lot of people do therapy, and I've done therapy a bunch of times. Ever since my mother and them, they were sending me to therapy as a kid. So, because of my personality. But what I discovered is, as I've gotten older, and what I notice goes wrong for a lot of people is they do the therapy, but they don't do the work that comes along with after and outside of therapy. Because the goal of therapy is to keep you in therapy, because that's how they make their money. But if therapy actually worked, you would take it, you would you would get it from the expert, they'd point it out to you, and then you go work
Go
on
deal with
yourself.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
know what I'm
Like, yeah,
saying?
like it would have like a
So,
natural expiration to it. Like, okay, our work here is done. Thank you very much. Off I go.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, so it's the blues. It's the blues. That's the reoccurring topic or theme for me. Because I think the blues is also beautiful in certain ways, because they're the concept of, like, tears of joy, and it can be, as much as we want our children to grow old and become independent and do all that, there's still a heavy level of sadness that comes with that as well. knowing the world that we live in, but then also just, you lose a purpose in certain ways that you used to have when they were younger. So it's very much like you have to figure out a way to like, okay, how do I fill this void? And that's a pretty sad, moment when you come to those points, especially as a parent
Mm.
or as a lover, and to find out like, man, like I thought this person was like my everything, and I thought they were going to be my everything, and it doesn't work out. Like
Hmm.
for some people that's a heavy thing, but for me, unfortunately, I just kind of came to acceptance at a very early age that everybody not meant to be forever, and everything isn't forever. So having that kind of personality again can be hurtful towards other people who still have faith in humanity and the you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I've learned how to just unfortunately I've learned how to be able to be like, all right, let me just step back and create, and that's it, you know what I'm saying.
You talked about having an in-house muse in relationships. You talked about downloading experiences from other people and then putting them into your artistry. I wanted to ask you if you had a daily practice of approaching your artistry in a certain way, or if you allowed inspiration to guide your creative process. But these two ideas that you shared make me wonder, is it just dependent upon where you are in life? Like what is your creative
Yep,
process? Is that the answer?
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Like let's say like if I'm not feeling the most confident as an individual, it could be anything. It could be, I might have like a little small beer belly, or, I might not like the way my face looks this particular week or month or months. And I'll avoid acting altogether because I don't want people looking at me or seeing me if I'm not happy with myself, right? So
Hmm.
then I'll focus on painting. I'll just commit to my visual art at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And then once I kind of in the visual art, what'll happen with that is I'll make sometimes it'll be a piece that inspires me, or I'll create something and or I'll create a collection and people immediately jump on them and buy them. So that helps build the confidence up a little bit. It starts making me feel a little bit better about myself, and start thinking like, okay, it's not the surface that matters. It's not the physical. You don't have to be this hunk or sex symbol or anything like that to matter as a man, as a male in entertainment. People value you, and so then next thing you know, I'll send in some auditions, or I'll start auditioning for something, you know.
Hmm.
And then once again, you get caught up into that routine, and then you think, okay, this is about to go, this is kicking in, I'm about to, yes, I'm about to get gig after gig after gig. And then the next thing you know, that doesn't happen. So then I'll go back to the music, because then that's when I've gotten the uh, personal experience of success and failure once again, to then maybe possibly talk about, okay, what were the roads that led to that, or what decisions that I make that maybe broke that down, or what gatekeeper or person who could have helped or didn't help or prevented that. Okay, well, let me make a record about people like those personality types. So
Back
it's
to the
like that,
blues.
but yeah, but for the most part, I've learned to just. My father used to tell me when he was living, he used to say, if you can just do one thing every day that contributes to your craft, then that's enough. And so I make it a point for me where sometimes it's like four things. So I'll wake up first thing in the morning, and I'll be in the mood to record. And so I'll try to start finishing. Like I'm working on a new record right now called Nothing Beautiful is Safe.
Mm.
And I only have a like 1.5 song left for this record to be done. But it's like these are the hardest 1.5 songs, because one of them is the title cut. So I want to make sure that, because it's the title song, that it's properly the message and point that I want to get across with that title, Nothing Beautiful is Safe, I want to make sure, okay, how do I get as many people as possible to understand and get the point without me telling them, per se, what to think. So I might get up and contribute to that. And, I might record a verse of it, and then I'll stop, and then I'll say, okay, let me finish. Let me add a little more to this painting. And then if I don't have to go somewhere or work or anything, then that's what I mean, where it's like you kind of have to. It's like this one thing. It's like this thing where you just have to wake up and create something.
Mm.
And that's my kind of like habit, because I'm an early riser. I prefer to, if I do anything creative, I prefer to do it when the sun is out. So then when the sun sets, I can recoup or like regroup with myself. Because as artists, well, I can at least speak for myself. I kind of have to figure out this way to be like this doctor for the outsiders, but also for myself. So I cut myself open, and then I spill my guts, and I pour my heart out, and then I share all this personal stuff about my life. And then people get it, and they're able to take it, and it either activates them or it breaks them down or whatever. But then I have to figure out how to properly, like a surgeon, reinsert and put those things back into places that I removed them from, and then have to still sit with it and hope that, okay, me releasing this or me putting this out, did it help me? Like, did it help me break through this issue or make me feel better about this issue? And I don't want to be spending 24/7 or late hours at the night letting this stuff out, to then have to immediately go to sleep in that energy with my mind racing, or so I treat my creative process, I treat it like a 9 to 5.
Okay.
So when I wake up,
Yeah.
between the window of me waking up and the sun going down, that's the window where you can best catch me as a creative. Now, special circumstances, if the job requires, or if I'm recording or working with someone else and it requires nighttime work, then I'll do that. But for me, my daily thing and my routine is from sun up to sundown, create, work on things. You know what I'm saying? Until you finish it. And then when you finish it, be happy, and then start the process all over again.
I like that. I like that strategic approach, because you're right. A lot of times you're buzzing and you're wired when you're coming off of a creative experience, and then like you
Mm-hmm.
can't go to sleep on that. And so it
Mm-hmm.
throws your whole next day off, because you're
Yeah.
trying to like wind yourself down. So I really like that you give yourself that time.
For years, I had an ulcer
Ah.
that I didn't know. And it got so bad to the point that it inflamed. And this is back in like, so basically probably from, and it stemmed from when me and my son were separated. So
Oh.
when me and my son's mother and his mother ultimately decided to not be a couple, or be together or whatever, my son was like probably about 2 years old. And so from the years of him being two all the way, I would say, till he was like 4 or 5, maybe 5 or 6, I had this ulcer that I was like, you can even look back at pictures of me during that time period where I was so skinny, because I just couldn't eat. I didn't have an appetite. I was just so heartbroken and so hurt that I had developed this ulcer. And then,
Mm.
at one point, it had gotten so bad that eventually I was just like, I told my mom, I said, Mom, just take me to the hospital. And, they probably gonna tell me something's wrong with me. I'm dead. I'm about to die or something, right?
Oh
And so
man.
we go. Yeah, yeah. So we go. But to keep in mind, this is also at a high peak in my music career. At that time, I was still touring. So I would be going to these shows. I would be going all over the world, and people didn't know that like I was in pain. Like literally, my stomach was grinding like so bad and just so hurt. Or I wasn't eating. I wasn't like I couldn't do nothing. But when the lights go on or when it was showtime, I was giving people this perception like it was all good. And then ultimately my mom took me to the doctor. And when I went to the doctor, the first thing the lady was like, "Do you have health insurance?" And I was like, "No." I was like, I started crying. I was like, "No." And I was like, because I immediately in my mind immediately was like, "Oh no, how am I going to deal with this?" And then next thing you know, she said, "Okay, baby, well, the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna get you some health insurance." So the lady, the lady was there. She helped me sign up. She said, "Congratulations, you now have health insurance. Let's find out what's going on." So then ultimately they sent me to, a gastrologist and and then they did the colonoscopy and the endoscopy or whatever, the one that goes through your throat version. And the guy was like, "I have good news." He was like, he said it was just an ulcer and it had inflamed so big that I couldn't eat nothing because it just blocked everything.
Wow.
And so
That's the good
lo and
news?
behold, yeah.
Oh,
So
that it
because lo and
wasn't worse.
behold, yeah, it could have been
Okay.
cancer. It could have been, they could have
Hmm.
said I had all types of polyps and all type,
Okay. Yeah.
all of that stuff, because that's what stress and that's what hurt and pain can do to people when you internalize it and you versus, you get it, you going out. And again, like I told you earlier, as a person since I was a teenager who has been very expressive to as time goes on, the older you get and the more you accomplish to find out there's still the mass majority of the people in this world are going to be try to silence you versus try to feed that. You learn how to internalize a lot of things, and it literally made me sick. And so long story short, because I was just piggybacking on the previous question,
Hmm.
is that I had to retrain myself to give myself a gift every day. And what that gift is, it's the gift of a break,
Mm.
allowing myself to take a break from everything, anything, anybody, like take a break, even from myself, because the way I am, meditation is very hard for me. But what I had, this roster taught me how to just sit upright in a chair and just sit still. And that's how I learned how to meditate. And what it would do was it would create me this ability for me to be able to just doze off, even sleep, like fall into deeper sleep than when I lay down because I was constantly stomach turning. And for years, I did this for years.
Mm.
I was doing this for years and people had no idea. Some people knew because I would complain about my stomach maybe in the dressing room or backstage or something. But beyond that, people were like, like, damn. And once I got that kind of cleared up, I mean, 2 weeks later, I felt like a completely new person. I
Wow.
have clarity, and it
Hmm.
sucks because one of my best relationships that I ever had at that time, and the young lady who was with me during that time, it was after I kind of felt better that I went to her and said, "You know what? You're not the one. This relationship is not." This is like the only woman I've ever proposed to or any of that stuff. And it was something even in that clarity, and it had more to do with the type of person that I was, not as much as who she was. It was more about like, you know what? The person who you think you've been dealing with I'm not that person. And while I have this now moment of like clarity and actual literal healing occurring, it's probably better that like we part ways. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
And yeah, it's just, art hurts, man.
Art hurts. Art hurts. I wow. Okay, so you've collaborated with a whole lot of different folks throughout your career, right?
Mhm.
Raheem Devon,
Yeah.
Yassine Bey, Michelle Ndegeocello, Eric Roberson. We talked about them in your bio, many other folks. Why is collaboration essential to your creative process, and how has that shaped your journey as an artist?
Well, I think that's where my theater background really comes into play. So at Carnegie Mellon, one of the first things they make you do, I don't know if they still do it, but when I was there, they make you for your freshman year, you take all your classes with the directing majors and
The design
the
people.
design
Mhm.
people, the
Tech people.
playwrights, the tech, all of them, right? So
Yeah.
they're in your acting classes.
Okay.
You're taking them all together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the point of it is to, I think, one, obviously, to gain a better appreciation and respect for the other people and other components, but more than anything, learn how to engage with those personality types. And so collaboration is very hard for a lot of artists because it's very hard for a lot of artists to let go of themselves. And when I say collaboration, I'm not talking about, a feature on somebody's song. I'm talking about like actually constructing a concept or trying to come up with an idea from scratch, but collectively. To me, that's the closest to theater that music ever is, unless you're talking about musical theater, literally. That's the only way that, to me, music, again, it taps into not only what I'm naturally good at, but also what I was trained to be able to do. So there might be a person who, might be super talented and they're great at what they do, but maybe the subject matters or maybe the topics or maybe the themes that they deal with when creating is the obstacle for them. There's a young lady I know who's a very talented singer who I did an event for her a few weeks ago, and I was telling her, she was telling me, she's like, yeah, I don't know how to record, like I do all these shows and I'm just singer and people, I know I'm great and all of that, but I just don't know how to translate that to recording. And I was like, well, I can give you a couple ideas, like here's one exact suggestion or here's another way. And she was like, she's like, I never thought about that or thought about it that way. And so for me, to me, I like that process. I like the creative process of, I call it creative engineering, finding ways to creatively solve a problem. So how do we, how do we get that opening monologue to be and fall in the right length of this 30-second music bed underneath? Okay, let's go through it. Okay, we don't kind of need that. We don't need that word, or we don't need maybe that, or maybe you should kind of like stop there. That to me is what I enjoy about the creative process. All of my friends when I was in college, they were all like engineers or science or these guys are like $1 million dudes now, you know what I mean? And a lot of me being engaged with them taught me how to like really view creativity as more as like problem solving more than anything. And so collaboration to me is, everyone's not good at it. Everyone can't do it. It's hard. Some can do it, kind of do it, but that's my favorite part of, making music more than anything is this collaborating with people, because it's just, you know, it's again, it's not an easy thing.
Mm-hmm. But what you get out of it is worth the effort,
It's the
right?
process. Oh yeah, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like the process.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
another part of your identity is educator.
Yeah.
And you've been an artist educator for 2 decades, and for half that time you've been teaching oratory to young people at Ford's Theater in DC.
Yep.
And I want to know what aspects of your artistry you bring to your teaching of oratory. And also if you can clarify what oratory actually is, because some people don't know.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say this on record. I actually would not be doing that job if it wasn't for you
Oh,
referring
W.
me. Like we live in a society that wants to make it seem often that, black men and black women are divisive and they want to keep us in division, especially in the creative world.
Mm-hmm.
But I can say that one of my greatest opportunities and I feel like it's my most rewarding, work out of anything that I've done this far till this day is my work at Forest Theater. And it wasn't, it wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for a woman like you who didn't settle for any implicit biases or what you perceived as the type of man or men that this place needed. And, fortunately enough, we had a woman named Cynthia Gertson who was there at the time as well, who was able to see the vision as well. And she didn't try to, again, she didn't try to control me or tell me how to behave. And they let me go into that program as myself. So I just want to publicly acknowledge and thank you for that you are the actual source of taking my educational component to another level by reaching out and giving me that chance. So I just want to publicly thank you for that.
Thank you. That's
without, just to tell you that.
No.
And also let the world know. But
can I just say something? Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's I really appreciate that acknowledgement, but I also want to say it is important to me that who you were. Like, I already knew you, right? Like, I knew who you were as a person.
Yeah.
And I knew that the work needed you.
Yeah.
And then in a way, I felt like you needed the work.
Yep, exactly.
And I understood what the work did for me. And I just was like, you bring they needed to see you. The kids need to see you. Yeah. Right? Like, real talk, the kids see me. Okay, great. But they're kind of numb to that. Had been there for a while. They're like, okay, yeah, lady, but I'm like, no, Black men who are individuals, who are standing in who they are, their truth, their identity, not conforming, but showing that there's a line around me. It's a place where I end and you begin, and I bring my own perspective. And I knew you well enough to know that you weren't going to conform to nothing anyway. So I'm look, if you put him in there with the kids, they're gonna get the real him. He is not gonna fake. So I just want to also say that I'm very grateful that you continue to do it. That you get, more and more kids get access to you, because it's so important.
And a lot of people, and it's not like a lot of money.
No.
It's not like, it's not like it's that, and that's why I try to tell people, where it's like that kind of, I have a lot of friends who are like super famous, and there's one particular actor who, he has a really big project that's coming out in the next couple of weeks or whatever. He's playing a major role in it, and periodically he'll hit me up and be like, yo, man, like, thank you. He's like, thank you. You're doing the real work. And I'd be like, I'd be like, well, what do you mean? He'd be like, you're doing the real work, man. Like, you're going into the classrooms, and while simultaneously still doing all the other things that you do, but you find a way to like prioritize the educational component. Because I tell people all the time, like, anything I'm working on or anything somebody reaches out to me, I always tell them, I say, I'm just letting you know I can do it. But for this month, from this period to this period, I'm dedicated to Ford's their oratory festival. And so because again, like I said, it's just my approach to education is very different than a lot of people. I try, one of the things that I do when I go into the classroom that's very different, especially when you're being sent in there for an oratory festival. First thing I like to do is I ask the young people, tell me something that's happened or recently going on in your life. Is there something that happened? Or I try to get them to feel safe first before I bring the agenda to the forefront, so that they can feel like they matter. I know often as parents, we can think that we know our children, but we really don't, or maybe not let them be who they really want to be sometimes. And I like that approach with these young people. And then, before I got there, they were doing like just having kids line up in a straight line and recite Abraham Lincoln speeches. And when I got in there, and even my first year, it caused conflict with like a couple of people who I worked with, because it was new to them, who as teachers, as the homeroom teachers, because they were like, wait a minute, do you realize that you're asking third and fourth graders to not only memorize Abraham Lincoln, but you want them to do movement and incorporate levels and things? And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. Like, that's what I want to bring to this program. I want to bring a new twist on it and show what it could be. It can be more than even that. And so yeah, so the Oratory Festival is my favorite. It's for people that are listening. Ford's Theater, they do a Lincoln Oratory Festival. It started off with just only Abraham Lincoln speeches, and as time has gone on, we were able to like encourage them to, grab maybe some other speeches. So we now incorporate speeches by Dr. King, Frederick Douglass, as well as I don't know, Mary McLeod Bethune. There's all these great speeches now that we go into the classroom with kids, elementary through sometimes not as high as high school, but junior high, and work with them and give them the opportunity to kind of see what it's like to prepare for a major production. That's what I try to like kind of really set them up for. Not necessarily just the historical aspect of Lincoln, but maybe this is the thing that the program that will help them, like tap dance and help me when I was in kindergarten. The thing that, you may be told that you're not outgoing, or you've been told to believe that you're shy, or that you're the small kid, or this or that. Whereas like I use this program as an opportunity to really help these young people grow and develop. And, here we are like 10 years later, pretty much. And, I've written letters of recommendation for some of these young people.
Wow.
I've like, there's one,
Mm.
there's like, there's students who, this year are like graduating from high school,
Mm.
who still, you know, reach out to me and have the same level of excitement and love for me that they did when they were like fifth graders. And,
Look what you did. Look what you did,
it's
Dub.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And
That's
so
powerful.
and so, yeah, yeah. And so it's important. And a lot of people, um I know that there's a lot of people who often project and wish, other things for me. They want me to be the cliche version of famous or popular, or they think I should be doing this or X, Y, and Z. And um, when it's all said and done, um, going into those classrooms, they just it just rewards me better
Oh, wow.
than any other thing um, in this industry. So that's so that program is very important. Um, just Sunday, now I get invited to the galas, and
Hmm. I saw
I
you.
get
I
to
saw you up there.
yeah, I get to
Yeah.
write, get taking photos with Nancy Pelosi, and
That's crazy.
yeah, and just last Wednesday, I I got a chance to meet up with my class, one of my classes this year, for their end of the year boat cruise on the Spirit of Washington.
Oh.
And they didn't know I was coming, so we surprised them, and I showed up, and of course they were all like, "Oh," because they were so sad after the performance, because they realized that, like, "Oh no, we're not going to see Mr. W anymore."
Hmm.
And so the teacher was like, "Yeah, they're really sad now," and all that. And I was like, "All right, well, I can come back to the school at some point, on my own or whatever." And she was like, "Oh, well, we got this event coming up, so you can come to that." And so, you know, and again, I saw one of my students. She was like, "Hey, thank you for the letter recommendation."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Uh-huh.
I got into the school, I got into the program.
Oh,
You
wow.
know,
Look at
um,
you.
yeah,
Look at
you
her.
know,
Look at that. So now her whole life journey, you're sewn into that.
yeah, yeah. So it's important. And then, like I said, one of my students is graduating from St. Albans this week, and even he was a soccer player, and this is a white kid, you know, some random white boy who's and he invite me to his he invite me to his soccer,
Yeah, yeah.
soccer games, and people probably be looking like, who is this random black man? This
Right. Like, how do y'all know
this
each
boy,
other?
this boy always runs up and hugs. Yeah, right, right, right. So yeah, so even so, like yeah, so just all around, man. That's a great program, and like I said, I wouldn't be a part of it if it wasn't for you and other people who allow me to go in and be myself and you know do it. So I'm as long as they allow me to do it, I'm gonna always work on that program.
I'm so
You know.
I'm so grateful for you, and I'm so glad that you bring your full self to the work. And there was overlap when you came on board. I remember being able to see you do your work and to see how you relate to the kids, and I was always just so proud and grateful because I knew you could be doing whatever you wanted to do. I knew you could be
Yeah.
traveling all doing whatever, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
you were
Yeah.
making a choice to be with those kids. And I didn't know how long you would do it. I was like, he'll probably, get busy. He won't,
Hmm.
how's he going to be able to make this work in his schedule? So the fact that you kept doing it, it's just
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
huge. Thank you. Uh,
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. Art hurts, right? You said
Yeah.
you said it earlier. You talked about it. One of the things you talked about was cutting yourself open and pouring your heart out, and then having to figure out how to stitch it back in and start over.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wanted to know the Art Hurts movement, the project, the entity.
Yeah.
What was the impetus to launch that project, and how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah. Well, more. I think a lot of times people misunderstand what that is. If you really look at it, the exclamation point is after the art and not the hurts part. So that's just so people can visually imagine or understand what it is. But I discovered at a very early age that art can be used as a weapon. There are a lot of wicked entities and corporations and industries and businesses that have bad intention, and they find creative ways to market and sell and attract people to a lot of harmful things. So
Yeah.
I've always believed that it's our job as artists and as creatives to create the opposite or antithesis or the counterculture of that kind of culture that exists. And so I believe that you can weaponize the same way that people weaponize our music and weaponize art. We as creatives should fight back. We should have ways to purposely make music. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying, that sometimes the blues that I create, it may not necessarily be about my blues, but it might be about like a friend of mine who might be in have a government position, and they can't really go off like they want to go off.
Mm-hmm.
So they might tell me even sometimes information that like is not meant for the public. And then I'll build on that. And then I'll figure out a way to create something to kind of expose, at least start a conversation about like certain types of behavior that maybe like is inappropriate. You know what I'm saying? That to me is like the equivalent of like a drone, finding a way to send that silent drone somewhere that you can't see, that can literally drop like a bomb that can wipe out a whole thing. I tell people all the time, people will fight and scream to pass legislations and laws and things like that. But what they don't know is that sometimes it could be that one poem or that song that a person hears, and it changes their whole like feelings towards something. They might not admit that, or they might not say that's what it is, but I am a believer in that. Art hurts is really about like consciously trying to create art that is for the sole purpose of contradicting something else that's potentially more harmful or non-contributing to our society in a positive way. Because I don't know about you, but I'm not afraid to admit that music and entertainment has gone like is off the rails now in terms of
Yeah.
you know where it's like the agenda is not even hidden no more in terms of like dumbing down society, creating more consumption instead of designing. You know what I'm saying? It's a war out. It's a war going on right now in the creative world,
Hmm.
and I think personally, the bad is winning.
It does seem like that. It seems like that's whereas I feel like there used to be a balance.
Hmm.
You had both sides of the coin, you had all the different shades of perspective,
Yeah,
and you could choose whichever one kind of fit how you were feeling at the moment, but you knew you could take it off and then go
yeah,
put something else on.
yeah,
Whereas it does feel like now
yeah,
there's a consistent tone, and
yeah.
it's all everybody
Yeah.
conforms to that.
And that also stems from, the creation of private prisons and things like that. Because once they figured out how they can like basically create this like funnel line from second graders all the way through adults that can this pipeline that would directly could feed them to prisons and get them in the system somehow at as early as,
Suspending kindergartners and first
third or
graders,
fourth
like
grade.
that's where that
Yeah,
starts.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so what they figure is, okay, we'll take like a hand instead of like creating diversity and all these other and variety in art. We're going to stick to certain subject matters and really fund those mindsets. So then it not only dumbs down a culture and population of people, but it also gives them the perception of like that there's no consequences for reckless actions.
Mm.
And so we'll let this music build their confidence to do something dumb and not realize that 9 out of 10 of the times the person that's on the record don't even live that lifestyle. That's just a person a role that they've taken on to make money, and not only for themselves but the companies that are funding that. They figure, okay, for every 5 artists we put out, we'll get at least 10,000 new criminals to work free labor for us. So like it's like that payoff is better than even the artists that they are investing in, because they don't even really care about that. It ain't even really no real ways to make music in the music industry right now like it used to be. Like there's no record stores no more. Spotify is obviously ripping everybody off, paying us like a percentage of a penny. Like
Mm.
what's a percentage of a penny?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like we're not even getting the whole penny. And so these record companies have had to find ways to, to make money. And the music industry is getting smaller and smaller, but a lot of it, I wouldn't be surprised if, the same people who, have invested in the music industry, are the same investors in private prisons. So it's like this kind of roundabout way to, you know, again, free labor.
Keep a certain like cultural perspective going. Keep a certain attitude going.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mindset. Yeah. It perpetuate
Yeah.
stereotypes, perpetuate implicit
How influence
bias,
how people deal
all
with
the
each other.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And one thing about School Without Walls, there was a class that we were required to take that was called conflict resolution. And that was one of my favorite classes
Mm.
because I was a master at it. Although I went to that school and although I was on Teen Summit and all that stuff, I still lived over by 58th Street in Northeast. So I'm from the hood. I'm from the numbers where people don't even realize DC goes up that high in the numbers. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Where I was me growing up, they were kidnapping people's kids and families to get them to do crimes and things like that. But because I identified myself as an individual very early in life in that environment, and I also played basketball, which was a bridge between me and the other kids around the neighborhood who may not have the same background or the same goals as I had. They protected me because they realized that I was myself. I was an individual. I was the first kid in my neighborhood to have a tattoo, and they called me white boy. You know what I
Wow.
mean? Now you look at
For the
now,
tattoo.
now it's yeah,
Hmm.
and then
Now everybody's covered in
or would cut
tattoos.
my hair.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, or cut my hair in a mohawk or something.
Hmm.
Just to do something random. Because even though I was going to school crosstown and even though I was on TV every Saturday, I still had to come back to that neighborhood. So however I represented them, I couldn't go and be something fake, because I would hear about it when I would come home. Because one thing that the hood, they might not have a lot of things, but everybody in the hood back then had BET. I know that much. And
Yeah.
they was they was watching it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
We were watching that.
yeah.
Hmm.
And so it worked out to where, again, I just had to, represent a community that was often, overlooked and often pushed into like, cliches and stereotypes where it was like, nah, there's all types of people that's from the hood. Like, there's not only one narrative that you have to settle for. And unfortunately, in entertainment, that's what we see a lot more of now. And it's always been like that, but now it's the consequences and the stakes are much higher now,
Hmm.
in society.
And you've said, I see art as a potent force capable of healing a society fractured by systemic failures and divisive leadership. And you just spoke to how you see art fulfilling that role, which I think is really powerful. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, it's that your consistency between what you say and what you do and how you express yourself as an artist, and even going back to the beautiful connection you have with Ford's Theater, and my gratitude for even being a part of that. Um, okay, Miles Davis, he had bebop, Birth of the Cool, electric kind of blue, various eras of his artistic expression. And I'm going to acknowledge that this type of categorization sometimes is more helpful to the observer than the artist. I know it's not necessarily helpful to do
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
to artists, but I'm curious if you wanted to categorize various periods of your body of work, like could you do that? And what are some of like the eras that you would name, or would it all be blues?
Um, the difficult thing about my thing is my work is that when I first started making music and putting it out to the public, I was a singer and rapper. And at that time, that wasn't normal.
Mm-hmm.
People weren't, people didn't really like that. People either liked me as a singer or they liked me as a rapper. But doing it combined, it wasn't until time went on and other popular artists started breaking through who did that concept that became more of a normal thing. But I would say like I could pick like records of mine and say that was like the era. So I had my Soul Sonnets period, like era, which was a record of mine, like it was one of my first records, which was like young single dude out here dating, out here trying love, whatever, whatever. And then I had my Bluetopia period, which was like my Bluetopia era was finding out that I'm gonna be a father. And now, how do I view the world now as that perspective, that Bluetopia area? Then we had the death of my father, which was that era. That's when I was like very much like, I don't care. I'm just gonna just create. I won't say not be self-destructive, but I'm gonna create art like really to hurt people feelings type thing. I went through that period.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that had to do with, again, the death of my father, while also the exodus of me from living in the same home as my son. So I had that era of doing that. And then after that, I would say like I had my Black Misanthrope era, which I'm kind of wrapping up now. Like I'm coming to the conclusion of that. And that's been going on since probably like 2012 up until now. The Black Misanthrope era is probably my longest era of like just being like, you know, I went to Ghana a few years ago to tour and perform, and when I came back, I had to sit my mom down and explain to her there's certain things that like she may have used to be able to say to me or use as like fear factors from a religious perspective or a cultural perspective. And I just told her, moving forward, I'm not telling you to not believe in whatever you believe in, but I'm just letting you know that those things no longer hold value or weight enough in me to create fear or discipline. You can no longer use it as a disciplinary method for me, because even as parents, they still will try to discipline you in certain ways, even when you're an adult. It becomes more verbal or subliminal. And I just had to, and she accepted it. I told her why. I told her the experience of going to the slave castles and hearing the stories of the church services above the dungeons, and how the introduction of what heaven is and all of that stuff, and how heaven, they thought it was above them. And then they think they're on their way to heaven because they're getting exited out of this dungeon, and then they get to this door, the door of no return, and then they say, "Oh, we forgot to tell you, you got to take one more. Heaven's, you're not there yet, but you're gonna get on this boat, and that's the final step to heaven." You know what I mean? Like the idea that this is something. And so, I just told her that moving forward, it's hard for me to go into like a church, and not feel cynical about it, or not feel depressed, or not imagine hearing those screaming people underneath while you're upstairs, while you're above them talking about love thy fellow man and, all of this stuff. But you're literally hearing wails and crying and screaming underneath. So it's made it hard for me to like funerals, things like that, weddings that are in churches, stuff like that. I can't really participate in that stuff no more because it creeps me out. You know what I'm saying? Like when I go in there. And again, it's not to take away from anybody's beliefs. I'm a person that I believe that there's all types of ways that people learn discipline and self-discipline. I think mastering self-discipline is the key. It's like, but unfortunately for some people, they have to go to jail, or they have to join the military, or they have to become extremists in religion, or they have to join a cult, or they have to, you understand? It's just some people that's the only way
they need that external.
That's the only way they stay disciplined.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, okay, I'm not going to kill somebody, not because it's bad, but because the Lord tells me that to do it. Or I'm not going to steal because it's the wrong thing to do, but because the Lord, you understand? Or because the police say I can't do it, or because it's the same. So I understand for some people they need that. Me personally, I no longer needed that in my life. I've won awards, I've been nominated for things, but I eventually had to kind of really let go of caring about that stuff, making that compromise, claiming to be someone who doesn't make negative or reckless compromises, but all the while I was, by like just continually going along with certain beliefs, not necessarily because they were my beliefs, but because great grandma told grandma, and then grandma told mama, and mama told, you know what I'm saying? Versus like, well, how much is this really my decision versus me just kind of out of loyalty for my mother or respect for my mother, So it's the thing that a lot of people go through. So in that process, it really, I've discovered the word misanthrope because I couldn't really label like what I was. I'm an equal opportunity offender, I guess, if that's kind of what it is. Like, I don't, I tell people all the time, I say, everybody out here is fighting over who's been hurt the worst.
Yeah, that does seem to be happening.
Instead of fighting on fighting for who we're going to heal first.
Mm.
You
That's a
understand?
bar. Is that in one
Think
of your
about
songs
that.
already?
Yeah. No.
Oh,
I'm
I
going to
was gonna
write it,
say.
but I'm just giving you an example. But that's what I'm saying. Everybody's fighting over who's been hurt the worst
Uh-huh.
instead of who are we going to heal first.
I like that.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
As long as everybody's feeling like, oh, okay, well, this population deserves rights and deserves certain freedoms, but the people over there, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? And then you got these
Mm-hmm.
people over here that are basically saying the same thing, and that's where we are as a society. And it made me just be like, you know what? I'm tired of all of y'all. I'm tired of all of y'all.
Uh-huh.
Especially as a black man, because none of y'all ever really ride for us
Mm.
at the end of the day. When y'all say inclusion or y'all say diversity and use these terms, and you're not really talking about black people. It's usually other populations of groups of people that identify first as whatever that group is. Because that's the other thing. A misanthrope hates humans. That's ultimately what that is. And
But
my
you
thing
don't hate
is,
humans.
I don't hate humans. No. But I identify humans as humans first and foremost.
Okay. Okay.
That's it. I don't like dealing with the people who, well, I identify as this first, or I identify, people's religion, sexual orientation, race, political affiliation, nationalities. That's how a lot of people identify as first
That's true.
before human. Before human.
That's true. Yeah.
So what happens is when you identify as these type of, there's 9 out of 10 of times there's some kind of rule that prohibits a different kind of human to be able to freely activate or be a part of those individual communities.
Mm-hmm.
So you can be a Democrat and still be racist and
Yeah.
still be sexist
Oh yeah.
and still be homophobic. Or you can identify as a gay person, but still be racist and still be sexist
Yep.
and still be, you understand?
Yep.
White, black. You can discriminate and have these implicit biases where it's like, well, out of sight. It's like what I was saying earlier. It's out of sight, out of mind. That ain't got nothing to do with my household, so I don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
But what is in my household is what I care about. I just kind of just dedicated to just being like, all right, well, I'm tired of all of y'all. Don't ever now. But if I see a group that's not being spoken up or stood up for, I'm usually the person that will speak up for that community that I feel is not identified but discussed. So let's say, I'm not I'm not an ally of anybody. I'm not. But I'm just not.
Okay.
I know, and it sucks.
It is what it
It's
is.
horrible to say it on the surface, but I'm not. I'm just not. But I am a defender of truth.
Okay.
And a defender of people who are when I see a person being oppressed or being targeted, I will step up and defend that individual or that population of people. But it's no different from anybody else, because this is going to sound crazy. I have a friend of mine who's a drummer who plays the drums, we can keep it moving.
Okay.
But he plays for like this popular country and western band. It's really big, huge, Grammy nominated, winning. They open up for Willie Nelson and do these festivals and all these big things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he's this black dude in this all white group, and these all pretty much predominantly all white, like, probably at least 90% populated by white people.
Like the audiences of the music and everything.
The audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when they're tailgating or they go to these festivals, he's telling me he sees the Confederate
I was gonna
flags.
say it gotta be Confederate flags.
He's seeing the Trump flags.
Mm-hmm.
He's seeing all that, right?
Yeah.
And so here's the thing. But he said, man, I said, bro, what is that like? And he was like, well, to be honest, he's like, what I'm learning is that the Confederate flags are probably safer for me to walk towards and engage than the Trump flags are. And I was like, really? He was like, yeah. He said, because at the end of the day, he was like, when I sit and talk to some of these guys that's like that wave the Confederate flags, their thing is there's a part of them that still really believes that they are patriots and representing America and love
Which
America.
is
I'm not
so
talking about Nazis.
ironic.
Yeah,
Just right
yeah,
because a Confederate flag is a rebel flag that was about secession, but American.
right.
But
Yeah,
so that's like
right.
that dissonance in and of itself. But yes, please.
Yeah, but the idea, but someone like that will identify a black man's struggle
Mm-hmm.
before somebody
Like a
that
Trump
waves a Trump
2024.
flag will
Yeah.
acknowledge it.
Oh,
Yeah,
that
you
yeah.
understand? You
I
understand
do.
what I mean?
I do.
So that's why I say that when people identify, when their calling card is their identity as a group or a box that they check, that is that's something that occurs and is an experience across the map.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not limited to just, the obvious low-hanging fruits like sex, gender, politics. Those are low-hanging fruits to me. Like, I think everybody knows, okay, that's the society we live in now, right?
Yeah.
But there's still these micro groups, and there's these little tiny other populations of people all over the world who believe in what they believe in or don't believe in what they believe in. And I think that, again, to come full circle, I think that it's important to identify humans as humans first. We got to get on that level first. Human rights. That's why, Malcolm X and many others in the past, they were fighting for human rights. First and foremost, we want to be identified as humans. But unfortunately, because of capitalism, because of marketing, that's not a profitable concept.
Right.
So if I could sell the same sneaker and then just switch the colors or add a flag or take away a flag, and it's the same sneaker, and I can sell it to 10 different types of people who identify a certain way, that's more beneficial for me as a
Mm-hmm.
greedy person who don't care about none of them. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
And so that's what I mean, where I say that's where the kind of like that's where like the self-destructive and non-productive aspect of people fighting over who's been hurt the worst. That's what it is. So yeah, so I'm phasing out of my misanthropic period. So that way I can probably, capitalize on some people a little bit more in the near future. In case I want to run for office, or maybe even open a church of my own or something. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay.
I've always said that later in life, when I'm like I'm still in my 40s, so I've always told people that my 50s is going to be like, that's the era of me rounding in it all. Like, this has all been practice for me. Everything I've
Mm.
been doing up to this point, it's all been practice.
Okay.
It hasn't been accomplishments or goals or anything like this stuff has all just been practice. It's been me developing the emotional baggage and emotional experiences that are necessary to be a real actor, to be a real artist, to really show your real cause and effect. Because so many of us come from so many privileged experiences that we ain't really been through nothing. But when you look at some of these artists that are like, just, some of our greatest like artists, they came from hell. A lot of them come from, a lot of them were abused as children. A lot of them were neglected. A lot of, you look at these athletes. I would tell my son all the time, like, hey man, you better be hungry out there on that basketball court, bro. Like, you got to be a dog out there. I said, because it's some kid that's coming from down south somewhere where it's, they living in a shack somewhere, and they're practicing basketball without shoes, and they do, where they really trying to get out. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So I've always been very conscious and aware that I've had a very privileged life, in the not in the definition of wealthy per se, but opportunities.
Okay.
I've never really, outside of just being, struggling sometimes to pay bills, I've never really had the struggle or hurt that it takes, I think, to be a great artist. And I think that I've just been working on that. And the universe has worked on that with me. And I believe 50 years of life is a long time of ups and downs and experiences to go through to where you can really like tap into it. Especially, I'm a sense and memory type of actor.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how to make myself cry. But the way I was taught and trained as an actor was, okay, just think about something that you really were that really affected you in life and emotionally, and then you apply it to whatever that character is. So although I might be playing the role of a guy whose wife is leaving him, I've never been married. I've never experienced my wife leaving me. But maybe I can draw from when my father passed away, or I can draw from, when I disappointed my mother or I disappointed myself or my son. And that's what propels the tears or the emotions that's necessary for me to execute the work in my hands. And I don't know, maybe it's a curse, it's a gift and a curse that I put on myself. But 50 is the mark for me, was the marker for me of when I'm like, all right, all this stuff, this was the practice. Now it's time to like manifest like those things, and see what the results are. And again, like the bio said that you read, I'm a ranter of my own thoughts sometimes. So maybe what I'm saying is going to definitely sound crazy, but I just I've just been very conscious of even the unconscious things that I do sometimes throughout the last 40 something years of my life. And it's mildly destructive in certain ways because it's like I've been taking on whatever perception a person has of me, I'll take it on for them. So if I know that this person views me as this, okay, I'll be that. That's what I'm gonna be for you.
Mm.
That's what that's the dub, Oh, I'm gonna be that. I'm gonna cater to you as that particular dub. And so in my 50s is when I want to finally be me and who I am versus just always adapting to separate personality types of myself or characteristics of myself for individuals. Because I found myself doing it for their comfort level more than my own at times. And we all do this, but people don't want to admit when they're getting played or they're playing themselves or
Oh,
they're
sure.
doing this.
Yeah.
But people do this like in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've just been able to be consciously aware of it and articulate it. Like I'm aware of it. You know what I'm saying? And that's again where I say like that's where the spectrum and the OCD aspects of me kick in. You know what I'm saying? That's really what that is. That's when those traits really, where I'll make oh, he broke. Oh yeah, I'm gonna be that. I'm gonna be broke for you because my mom's an accountant and she taught me that. She's like, oh baby, if a person that's the
Let them think you.
let please yeah.
Oh yeah,
Because
that's
they,
real.
they ain't gonna ask you for nothing. Because then you ain't got
Yep.
worried about them asking nothing. You ain't got worried about nobody taking credit for anything you accomplish. You ain't got, and I mean, and it's kind of sick. My mom's like, although my mother's very religious, I joke with one of my nephews all the time, who lived with her for a period of time when he got put out of his house, and my mom's like mothers of the dragon. My mom's like she's sick. It's Game of Thrones for her. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
And she does a very good job of masking that under the veil of being an evangelist and a missionary, which is really her thing. I've played second fiddle to Jesus my whole life. You understand?
Mm.
And that's something that as a son is often very hard compromise. The idea that that you're gonna always be second place to Jesus. You understand what I'm saying? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's how do you compete with that?
You don't.
You don't. You accept it and
Yeah.
you just kind of you compartmentalize it and then you keep it moving. That was one of those rant moments.
Okay. Well, just to you. you feel like in your 50s, the next era is going to be when you bring it all together. And
Yeah.
you feel like since you didn't suffer as greatly as some of the greats, your 50 years of practice is the replacement or the equivalent of deep suffering that
Yep.
like a I don't know, like a Robert Johnson had at a super young age and
Hmm.
was able to create blues. And you just needed more time,
Yeah, yeah.
more earth time for your
Yeah, yeah,
blues.
for
All right.
sure. Because I would love to open the W.Ellington Felton Institute of Art or something,
Mm.
or have a space where all of the things that I do have a home. So maybe during the daytime there are workshops and classes going on, but then at 4 o'clock it's the downstairs area, or there's a cafe that opens up, and then people are able to come there and express themselves. And whereas it being separate, a lot of times, people have these businesses, and it's like you got these spaces. What are you doing with it? Like, what is it? Space. So there's a lot of times where you can have other things going on. You can have workshops for kids and young people and adults and senior citizens during the daytime. That's the nonprofit aspect of it. Then you got downstairs, then you got an actual space where not only the students that you work with, but other individuals can actually execute what they're learning. DJ Prince Paul, a producer that I worked with a few times on his record, and he's also the one who made it possible for me to write and perform with Chris Rock on his album Never Scared. He would always tell me, like, W. Ellington, the best demo is a record.
Mm.
And I would be like, yeah. And it made sense. And he says, because it puts what you do in context. Because you can always say to somebody, oh, I'm an actor. Oh, hey, I'm a rapper. Oh, I'm a singer. Or I'm a producer. Or I'm a this. And when you do it that way, you're limited to whatever that individual's perception or definition of what all those things are.
Yeah.
You
Yep.
understand? But when you can put it in the context of, and what that is the form of that for a recording artist is a record that has multiple songs. It shows that you can collaborate. It shows that you can write. It shows you can perform. It shows that you do these things, versus you just having this title that is just open for interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, unfortunately, when you're an interdisciplinary artist like myself, you're going to have more people trying to get you to quit things or pick one thing than people trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we feed this? Okay, or how do I use this to my advantage? Where you have this person who could come in and literally do all of the above, versus us having to, have even a whole bunch of people do these separate things. I see myself trying to create a space, even applying for like positions that I see out there, with many, famous or historic art institutes and things like that, to where that's where I want to be like, all right, now it's time for me to really show like the master plan. It was through education that drew me into theater and the arts. So no matter what, that's always going to be the goal. And that is to ultimately like really show people how to do this, like really show people, whether it's through example of execution in a film or a play, or in a larger classroom setting,
Like a residency?
um, residencies. Again, like I like the classroom, man.
Okay.
I love teaching, especially older kids, and adults. I really like teaching them, because again, you'll discover like there's a lot of people out here who ain't really never been themselves. Like they really have gone decades after
Their
decade and
whole
years after
lives.
their whole
Yeah.
lives, just not being
Yeah.
themselves. And so I like to be one of those people that kind of like show them like, hey, this is what it's like. It is not necessarily the most beautiful thing sometimes, but it's still like you always hear these stories, and I'm honestly going to shut up now. But you always hear
I'm
these
into it.
stories. Yeah, you always hear these stories of people on their deathbed, and they always like, son, daughter, baby, I lied. All that stuff I told you that mattered in life, all of that stuff that I told you to put value in, it don't even matter. Live life to its fullest. Do chase. You understand? I don't want to be one of those people. I want to die empty. I don't want people to say that I had all these things or these ideas and I just had them and I just waited for opportunity to get them out. No, we have no excuses. You got YouTube, you got various platforms for artists to be able to do their craft and show it. Whether it's for 10 people, whether it's for 10,000 people, there is no excuse now. Before we had these things, I was a believer in that. And now that even more that we have these things, it's even better. You know what I'm saying? So even though I hate Spotify, at least now I have the means to directly put my record directly on Spotify without me having to sign my name away or sign my image away.
Yeah.
Or you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so much more agency and power over yourself.
So
your output, your artistic output. I don't mean to make it sound so corporate.
and then also in the 50, I don't want to be a rapper. I don't want to be a rapper too much in my 50s. I don't mind revisiting or performing catalog that I created over the last 50 years. But in terms of like moving forward in my 50s, I don't want to be a rapper. Like I don't want to be known as a rapper. I don't want to be known as a singer. I want to be like Sammy Davis Jr. or Paul Robeson. I want to be like known as W.Ellington Felton. And these are just all the different things that he can do or has done. And I just think it takes time for that. I think it takes time for society and just life to like catch up sometimes. I handle my dad's catalog, and this is a lot of it is music that was created before I was even born. And I've been fortunate enough to, place his music in commercials. One of the biggest placements I've done for his record, one of his records was there was a movie called Just Mercy with Michael B. Jordan in him.
Yeah.
So one of his songs called Dream Come True is in that film.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I understand the importance of legacy. And for Black people, and especially Black men, if you're not born into wealth or generational wealth, the closest thing to generational wealth is legacy. And that's why I'm saying it's like Game of Thrones. If you got one of them crests, or you got one of those flags that you can throw up and it's your family's name because somebody before you did it before you, legacy is a choice also. It's not automatic. You have to choose to embrace legacy. Trust me, I have a son that goes through it now. He struggles with it. He's trying to do the complete opposite. He wants to be self-made. And he has to understand, like, look, bro, there's nothing wrong with like piggybacking a little bit or acknowledging that, hey, not necessarily me, but your grandfather before your father set this up. He's really the reason. And so, that's always been also part of my approach with the long game aspect of it too, by creating an extensive catalog, because I've learned that ownership is really the most valuable component of the music industry. When you own your stuff, you can do whatever you want with it. You can do whatever you want with it. And I'm blessed and fortunate enough where I had a father who had the courage to have his own record label, make his own records at a time period when that was unheard of, in the 60s and 70s. That was unheard of. And I know that he did it with the intent of legacy, of like, okay, I'm going to create this stuff so that way if, hopefully one of my children, AKA me, cares enough, they'll continue to keep that alive and so forth. And then hopefully one day, eventually my son will do the same for me.
I don't.
You ready? You done?
I don't.
What you about to say?
I just, I'm just processing everything that you're saying. And you have a remarkable awareness of yourself, both of who you've been, but also in real time, and an acknowledgement of what you want and what it's going to take to get there, and your ability to manifest your life experience is really powerful. And so it really resonates with me when you say you want to create opportunities where you're in classrooms showing people what it looks like to be an individual, to be an artist, to be true to yourself, and that it's not easy and it's not pretty all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really I'm not gonna speak for you, but it seems like you're free. You seem like a free person.
Yeah. I'm giving myself 50 years to like really work that out, yo.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. And because 50 not old now in
No,
2024.
no, it is not.
That's not old. You know what I'm saying? I can ride a bike for, at least 20 miles. I still play ball. I still,
That's
I
impressive.
do, you know what I'm saying? Self-preservation that's really what it's about. It's
Yeah.
about self-preservation. It's like, it don't matter you create all this stuff if you're not alive to perform it when the time is necessary to do it. Or, we see a lot of brothers, in the music industry and in the arts. These brothers be dying early,
Yeah.
and a lot of it comes from only being what other people want you to be more than yourself. And then you internalize it and it makes you sick. I'm trying to tell you, it makes people sick. And I know you as a Black woman, it's like I have to be careful too as a man to not, what they say, mansplain.
Yeah.
Is that what it
Yeah.
is?
Yeah. About what?
About struggle
Oh. Yeah. Yeah.
as if y'all don't know too. You understand what I'm saying?
That's true.
But the difference is some people either avoid the struggle, embrace the struggle, or ignore the struggle.
Mm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
They some people just put up the blinders,
Yeah.
But some people like myself, I like to embrace it and see like, okay, how do we come up with a solution for this? Like, how do we create a solution? Like, not a Band-Aid, not a quick fix, but like, how do we really resolve this? And it's a life that is free, but it's also one that involves a lot of separation and a lot of alone time.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember when I told you at the beginning of this interview, I was actually born an introvert. I'm not naturally an extrovert, even though I can entertain and even though I'm able to, you know, you could put a script in front of me and I can read it cold as if I practice it, or these are things that I'm able to do. I don't know how, but for the most part, I live a very isolated life. I live alone. I don't go out most of the time unless it's work related or I'm invited to something. That's the other side of the coin of being free.
Mm.
Some people think being free is like, oh, well, I'm in the streets, girl. Girl, we gonna be in the streets tonight. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
Even I got homeboys that'll be like, man, I'm gonna be in the streets this summer. I'm gonna be in the streets this summer. And I'm like, all right, you think that's free, but it ain't, because outside is expensive.
Yeah, it is. It sure is. My goodness.
So I'd rather be a beer snob, drink my
Yeah,
drink my
IPA.
drink my IPAs
Uh-huh.
that are fresh. I go to my specific specialty store to buy it, and you can think I'm weird. I don't care. But I know that these are the things that bring me peace, and I'm okay with that, and that is free. But like I said, it's taken me almost 50 years to figure out freedom.
Mm-hmm.
In the midst of people telling you, oh man, you have such a great life or this, and I'd be like, I just didn't feel it. I didn't feel that way because I was allowing the superficial and the surface definitions of what success means and what being a man means and all that. I allowed that stuff to be so present that eventually it took breakups and it took heartaches and it took also an ulcer that almost killed me. It took the death of my father. It took me still having a relationship with my mother even as an adult, and her never getting remarried and all that, and pretty much being the man of her life forever. You know what I'm saying? Those are the struggles that I'm talking about that I've had to naturally go through because most of it's based on the circumstances in which I was born into that I had no control of. So I had no choice but to control it. I had no choice but to become obsessive and compulsive about it and learn how to be this like learn how to be okay with spending a lot of time by myself. My brother and sister were 10 and 12 years older than me. So I was like an only child. They grew up in a 2-parent home. I grew up in a 1-parent home. These are all these things that in society you're not allowed to deal with because you gotta keep it going. You gotta be in it.
Yeah. Keep
What you
producing.
gonna do?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm just conscious of that, and I'm happy to finally see myself finally breaking through. I'm happy to see therapy eventually finally working. You understand what I'm saying? Like versus being one of those people to be like, oh yeah, I went to therapy, or nah, like I've been doing the work, and again, I'll get reminders here and there from more famous or popular friends of mine, and I ain't gonna lie, it makes me feel good when I know, like, behind closed doors that I'm the person that's really inspiring them. You know what I'm saying?
That's dope.
And that's the part, that's the process.
Yeah.
So that's what I like about it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm not super famous, but you definitely inspired me. And I'm I'm so full from this conversation. And I'm just grateful that you opened up today and took the time to talk with me. So I think,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, of course, of course. I think we'll end it there. And as long as you promise that we get to talk
Oh
again
yeah, absolutely.
later so we
Yes.
can
Yeah,
check
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
notes.
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think I'll be like, what I'm gonna be. I'm 40. I'll be 48 in October. So
Okay.
we're getting closer to 50.
Yep. So once we get on the other side of 50, we'll see what that's like, what that
Yeah,
era is like, and see, how you manifested that. So,
yeah. And I've been auditioning more lately. I just played a cop on this TV show
saw that.
not too long ago, and I've been jumping out there a little bit more. But again, I just I'm one of those people who's always just kind of march to my own drum, and I just I gotta continue that, especially in such a noisy world we live in now, with everybody again fighting over who's been hurt the worst.
Well, thank you for your time,
Yes.
and we're gonna talk again soon.
Yep.
W.Ellington Felton, everybody. Until next time.
Thank you.
Keyboard is produced, directed, and hosted by Tim B. Duncan. Theme music by Psycho Sid. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe or follow and leave us a review or give us a rating. Your support helps Keyboard reach more listeners, and it means the world to us. Episodes drop every Tuesday. Tell a friend, tell your mama now.